I recently deleted a video from this channel just when it was starting to take off. It wasn't an easy thing to do, it actually sucked, and it was all because of recent laws introduced in Queensland. Not because I thought it clearly broke the law, but because there was just enough uncertainty that I didn't feel comfortable leaving it up. And the reason I'm telling you that is because I think it says something bigger about how the new anti-hate speech laws that were recently passed in Queensland Parliament are playing out in the real world. Now, before we go any further, I want to be really clear about something up front. This video is not about attacking these laws. They exist for a reason, including addressing things like anti-Semitism, and that's a really important thing to be trying to do. No group of people should be made to feel threatened or intimidated based on ethnicity, culture, or religion. What I want to do here is something a bit different. I want to explore how these laws can affect people who are trying to communicate in good faith, and what happens when the boundaries aren't completely clear. So let me take you back to that video. It was the documentation of 2 protest marches held here in Brisbane last year. One was a pro-Palestinian march and the other was the March for Australia, which was mostly protesting what organisers described as mass migration. The goal of the video was to show what actually happened, not spin it, not argue it, just document it, and to share my observations as a neutral observer. Some have argued about just how neutral I was, but my aim was to be as balanced as I possibly could. In the footage, there were people chanting a phrase that has since become highly controversial. You know the one I mean, the one that mentions the area between 2 bodies of water. And importantly, it wasn't just one side using it. There was also a counter-protester using the same phrase back in the opposite direction. So the video wasn't promoting anything, it wasn't endorsing anything, it was documenting what took place. There was also a short section where I briefly discussed that phrase, not to take a position, but to point out that it carries very different meanings depending on who you ask. Some people see it as a political expression, others see it as something deeply offensive. Same words, very different interpretations. The video got a few thousand views and then it went dormant, as event-based videos on this channel tend to do over time. Then recently something changed. The videos suddenly started getting more views again. And I think it's pretty clear why that was. Because around the same time there were reports of more than 20 pro-Palestinian protesters being arrested here in Brisbane under these new laws. So naturally, more people were searching for information around this topic, and that likely led them to my video. And that's what made me stop and reassess, especially since the video was made before the laws were introduced. Now, before going any further, I want to ground this in what the legislation actually says. In general terms, the laws make it an offence to publicly use certain expressions in a way that is considered likely to incite hatred, serious contempt, or severe ridicule towards a group of people. That can include things like chanting at a protest, displaying words on signs, or publishing material online. And importantly, it's not just about what the speaker intended. It can also come down to how the expression is reasonably understood by others. Now, there are also exceptions written into the legislation, and this is where it gets particularly relevant to my case. There are protections for things like fair and accurate reporting, journalism in the public interest, academic or artistic work, and genuine discussion of matters of public interest. So, on the surface, a video like mine documenting a real-world event would appear to fall within those kinds of exceptions. But here's where things become less clear. What actually counts as journalism? What qualifies as being in the public interest? If you're working for a major organisation like the ABC, there's a clear framework, editorial standards, legal teams, institutional backing. There's very little ambiguity. But what about independent creators? What about small channels? What about someone like me running a YouTube channel that aims to document and explain what's happening locally? Because from my perspective, that video was journalistic in nature. It was documenting events, not promoting them. But I don't have a legal team reviewing every upload, and I can't say with absolute certainty how those exemptions would be applied in practice to something like this. And that uncertainty is what led me to the decision I made. There have now been dozens of arrests under these laws, and that includes people from a range of backgrounds, including some from the Jewish community itself. Regardless of where you sit on the issue, that detail alone shows how complex this situation is. These laws are, in part, designed to reduce harm, including anti-Semitism. But even within communities they're intended to protect, there isn't always a clear, unified view on how these should operate in practice. And that complexity is really important, because it reinforces the idea that meaning and impact can vary significantly depending on perspective. And at the same time, there are already discussions about potential legal challenges. Some protest groups have indicated they intend to challenge these laws in court, and legal experts have raised questions about whether they could ultimately be tested against Australia's implied freedom of political communication. Now, I'm not here to make any claims about how that would play out. That's something that would be determined through the courts over time. But I think it does highlight something important. Even at a legal level, there isn't complete certainty yet about where the boundaries of these laws will ultimately sit. And that brings us to the bigger picture. There's a concept often referred to as a chilling effect. It's where people change their behaviour, not because they've done something wrong, but because they're unsure where the line is. And in my case, that looked like this. I removed a video that I believed was acting in good faith, not because I thought it was illegal, but because I couldn't be completely certain how it might be interpreted. And it's not just me. I've seen a constitutional lawyer who is also a professor emerita at Sydney University teaching constitutional law, who did a video here on YouTube explaining these laws, and that highly respected lawyer avoided saying the phrases out loud altogether. So if even people who specialize in this area are being cautious, that tells you something about how these laws are being perceived. And I think the core tension here comes down to this: intent versus impact. In everyday conversation, we tend to think about intent. What did someone mean? What are they trying to say? But in laws like this, impact matters as well. How is something received? How is it interpreted? And when you're dealing with language that has multiple meanings depending on who hears it, it becomes difficult to navigate that. Because if you're not completely sure how something will be interpreted, the safest option is just to not say it at all. And that's where I want to shift into giving my 2 cents. From my perspective, you'll hear a range of views about the intent behind these laws. Some people see them as a necessary step to reduce harm, while others have raised concerns that they could limit certain types of political expression. Where the truth sits on that spectrum isn't something I can determine as a matter of fact, and it's not what I'm here to focus on. What I do want to discuss is the uncertainty around the laws, because that is having an effect that's not always obvious, because it's not just about what gets said, it's about what doesn't get said. Videos that don't get published, discussions that don't happen, people choosing to stay silent, not because they're trying to spread harm, but because they're not completely sure how their words will be received. And I think that's something worth thinking about, because finding the right balance here isn't easy. You want to reduce harm, but you also want to allow space for documentation, discussion, and good faith exploration of complex issues. I'm definitely curious to hear your thoughts. Where do you think that balance should sit? If you're new to the channel, you should check out the last weekly update videos so that you can be up to date with everything happening across Greater Brisbane. And if you want to say thanks for the work that goes into making these videos, you can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, or you can become a channel member and join the community of people who support this channel and help keep it running. So thanks to everybody who has done that. That's it. See ya.